Healthcare still very much on President Trump's mind. He tweeted about it a lot this weekend, threatening to cut subsidies to Congress and insurance companies, saying, quote, if a new healthcare bill is not approved quickly, bailouts for insurance companies and bailouts for members of Congress will end very soon. Joining us now is Republican Congresswoman Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee. Thanks for being here in studio.
Sure, good to be with you.
Are you getting a bailout from the federal government?
No, all members of Congress are on the Affordable Care Act. We're all on the D.C. Small Business Exchange. And as the federal government has done, they provide a portion of insurance as a benefit to employees.
Right. The president doesn't like those for members of Congress.
That's right. And so many of our employees, even those that are in our districts, Allison, are on the D.C. Exchange. And one of the things we tell people all the time, we know firsthand the problems with health care. And we think that the Senate needs to get to work and send the House a bill so that we can get this fixed.
And let's talk about that. But sure. just one last thing, because the president seems fixated on this. What if those subsidies went away? I mean, look, he's threatening to cut the subsidies
Sure.
that he give the cost sharing, okay, with insurance companies that
That's
go
right.
to low income Americans. So that's one of the threats. And then the other threat is the subsidies that
the subsidies
Congress gets.
that go to the insurance companies are there. It's called the risk corridors. And this is one of the reasons that we have to fix this. I hear from people all the time about the cost of insurance. And when you look at the $9 million in the Affordable Care Act marketplace,
yeah.
Only 1.6 million Americans buy this insurance product without a subsidy.
Yeah, so I guess
all the rest of those, and that is why the president keeps saying, you know, we need to look at those subsidies, but it's why we keep saying this has to be fixed. The insurance is too expensive to afford.
Right.
And when you're talking about only 1.6 million Americans buying a product without a subsidy, you see how expensive it is.
Yeah, I hear you. But
Plus,
my question is,
yeah.
what if he takes it away?
If he takes it away, then Congress will be forced to take an action and try to clean this up. I don't know what it would be, but there would be an action necessary to clean it up. You cannot afford this insurance. 19 million Americans opted themselves out of the system. 6.5 million chose to pay the penalty, and then you had another 12 that went in there and said, look, I'm going to seek an exemption for this.
Yeah.
So you've already got that 19 million that opted out.
But do you get the impression that President Trump is looking to speed the demise of the Affordable Care Act as he sees it by withdrawing those cost-sharing subsidies?
President Trump, I believe, is looking to solve the problem. And the problem is we've got the Senate who cannot seem to, you know, they like to work in gangs. So they've been the gang of 7 and 8. I want the gang of 51. I want the Senate to show some spine and fix this problem.
That seems to be impossible. I mean, what you're calling for, they are not all of one mind. Obviously, they've tried for 7 years.
51 of them need to make a decision that they're going to fulfill a promise to the American people and send the House a bill so that we can get this issue resolved. It's not fair to anybody, Allison. I had a telephone town hall last week.
Yeah.
80% of the people on that town hall, regardless of what side of the issue they were on with the Affordable Care Act, 80% said the Senate needed to pass a bill and send it to the House so we can fix this.
I understand, but I mean, their 7-year effort of trying to repeal and replace came to an end last week. There was no consensus. You can't get all 51 that you're calling for to all agree on what the way forward is. So now what?
You know, they're going to have to just do a process of sitting down, working through where they can get this gang of 51 to agree on something, send it to the House, so that we can fulfill a promise and be fair to the American people that are stuck in the Affordable Care Act system or who have insurance that is too expensive to use and deductibles too high to even seek access to care.
Very quickly, I want to ask you about Russia.
Yeah.
How would you like President Trump to respond to Vladimir Putin now that Putin is cutting U.S. diplomatic staff by 755 people.
I want him to continue to be firm with Russia. Sending in the 59 Tomahawk missiles in that Syrian attack was the appropriate thing to do. Doing the sanctions bill was an appropriate move for Congress, and President Trump needs to basically have Congress's back, if you will, on the sanctions and be very firm with Russia.
Got it. Congresswoman Marsha Blackburn, thanks so much
So
for
good to be
being
with
here.
you.
Great to
Good
have
to
you in
see you.
studio. Let's get over to John.
All right, Allison. New Jersey Governor Chris Christie getting into a Cubs fan's face at a baseball game. What he said and what started the whole thing next in Bleacher Report. Raising eyebrows.
And when you see these towns and when you see these thugs being thrown into the back of a paddy wagon, you just see them thrown in, rough. I said, please don't be too nice. Like when you guys put somebody in the car and you're protecting their head, you know, the way you put their hand over. Like, don't hit their head, and they've just killed somebody, don't hit their head. I said, you can take the hand away, okay?
All right, so was the president encouraging police to be rough with suspects? Joining us now, CNN law enforcement analyst, retired NYPD Detective Harry Houck, and former Philadelphia Police Commissioner Charles Ramsey. Commissioner, I want to start with you. I want to read you a statement from the current New York City Police Commissioner, James O'Neill, who said to suggest that police officers apply any standard in the use of force other than what is reasonable and necessary is irresponsible, unprofessional, and sends the wrong message to law enforcement as well as the public. Your response, Commissioner?
Well, I would agree with Commissioner O'Neill. I was very concerned when I first heard those remarks because I believe it reinforces a very negative stereotype of police that we've been trying to overcome, and that is that police use excessive force on a regular basis. We violate people's constitutional rights, and nothing could be further from the truth. Police are out there every single day operating in a very professional manner, taking some very dangerous people off the streets and doing so without using excessive force or violating people's rights. And I think that gave an impression that we just do not need.
Harry Houck, did it send the wrong message?
Well, you know, I sat there and I watched it, and what's really key here is when he made that comment, you heard everybody laugh in the audience. Right? They took it all as a joke, and so did I. I didn't think he was serious. I don't think any police officer out there in the right frame of mind would take that as a way of condoning that kind of activity. All right, so I don't think it's really that big a deal. I think it was just playing to the police officers, trying to get a laugh there. You know, he's a very pro-police officer. You know, we're very happy we finally have a president like that.
There's actually three things you said there, and I want to talk about each one. I'm going to ask the commissioner about the laughing in a moment. I'm going to talk about the attitudes of police in general towards the president in a second, too. But I want to make one thing clear here from your point of view. Is it okay to condone, you know, rough treatment from police officers?
Oh, no.
So it's not okay?
No, listen, a police officer knows the rules, knows how to act out there. I mean, there isn't any police officers that listen to that statement and say, okay, I'm going to rough somebody up now because the president told me I could.
What if there's one?
Right? You know, what can you do if there's one? I mean, there are people out there that are crazy, and they hear some kind of comments that somebody made somewhere. Like, look when Obama said,
listen, but here, but you're saying those statements, if it's not a joke, is inappropriate, correct?
Right, exactly. Yes,
okay, so if he wasn't joking, how do you know he's joking?
Well, how do you know he's not?
I don't. Right, so but I will say this. If, you know, of the hundreds of thousands of law enforcement officials out there, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 who didn't take it as a joke, who took it as maybe a green light to behave differently.
Well, then I guess it shouldn't be a police officer. So you should be level-headed, and I'm sure the commissioner will agree with me here. Is that if you're a police officer and you take that comment as an okay to commit any kind of physical force against somebody that's not justified, that's a bad thing.
All right, Commissioner, what if he's just joking? Was it just a joke?
Well, first of all, I agree with the last statement that he just made. But, I mean, this is the President of the United States. He's Commander-in-Chief, not a stand-up comic. Words matter. And there's responsibility that goes along with leadership. Your words can actually influence behavior. It can shape public opinion. And you have to be very, very careful and measure your words very carefully whenever you're in a setting like that. So whether it was a joke or not, it was inappropriate. I think those officers, I don't know if they were just starstruck because they're standing behind the president, which doesn't happen every day, and he made a comment and they thought they needed to laugh or applaud. I don't know, but if they truly believe that, then they ought to be ashamed, because that's not what policing's all about.
So they should not have been laughing or applauding, you're saying?
No. Well, these things happen spontaneously. These things happen spontaneously. So it doesn't mean that everyone who applauded or laughed actually believes what it is he said, but it just gave the wrong impression. And that's what I'm trying to get at. And we've got a lot to overcome. It's been a rough 3 years. In fact, the only reason the police have not been on front and center on news stories around the country is because of President Trump. He took us off the front page. But that doesn't mean the issues and the problems have gone away.
Commissioner, something Harry said is something that I have heard from officers, since Friday here. Both of you suggested maybe they laughed because they were uncomfortable, laughed maybe because it was gallows humor, not laughing because they're necessarily supporting him in that statement. However, Commissioner, most officers I have heard from say that they do feel that this president has their back, and those are the exact words that they use, has their back in a way that they did not feel from the last administration, Commissioner.
Well, listen, I don't even know what that means, because policing is local, at least on our level, and we're not under the direct command of the president. I mean, we operate based on local state laws, we consistent with the Constitution and so forth. So if you engage in misconduct, if you think the President of the United States is going to come and save you, then you're mistaken. It's just not how it operates. So, and as far as the previous president goes, as far as the previous president goes, I know there was some criticism around President Obama, but he saw a legitimate problem, and that was the trust had been eroded in many of our communities, or didn't even exist in many of our communities, and that's why he formed the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing, which I had the honor of co-chairing. The very first issue we dealt with was building trust and legitimacy in the communities that we serve, which is important.
Harry?
Well, that's very important. But you got to remember also, there's this false narrative out there about the police. We've seen many instances in the last 3 years where police have been get the finger pointed at them for that were totally justified by police officers. We've had a couple incidents, and just a couple, where the officers didn't act correctly, and they might be prosecuted. But for the millions of times police officers deal with people every day out there, 99.9999% the police officers are exactly right in what they do. So this narrative out there feeds into this, and that's why we have this issue.
Should police ever take the hand away when they're putting a suspect into a car like that?
No, I always did it. No, I think, you got to act properly. When you put a suspect in a car, you put your hand on top of his head and you help them inside the vehicle.
All right, Harry Haupt, Commissioner, thanks so much for being with us. I do appreciate it. Good discussion this morning. Thank you to all our international viewers. For you, CNN Newsroom is next. For our U.S. viewers, President Trump hoping for a reboot after this big shakeup on his team. New Day continues right now.
Smart for him to pick.
With Chris Cuomo and Allison Camerata.
And we want to welcome our viewers in the United States and around the world. This is New Day. It's Monday, July 31st, 6 o'clock here in New York. Chris is off today. John Berman joins me.
What could possibly happen next?
What could go wrong? Great to have you here. Here's our starting line. President Trump hits the reset button after one of the most chaotic weeks of his presidency. In just hours, the president's new chief of staff, General John Kelly, will be sworn in. And President Trump will finally come face-to-face with his embattled Attorney General Jeff Sessions after repeatedly attacking Sessions. So what will happen when they meet at a cabinet meeting today?
That will be super comfortable. The president also launched a flurry of statements about health care, casting blame for the failure of the repeal efforts squarely on Congress, not him. The president is threatening to cut off payments to insurers, which could be a serious blow to low-income Americans. And now the president is even threatening the plans belonging to members of Congress. Then there are new threats from overseas. Russia has ordered the U.S. to cut its diplomatic staff by more than half in retaliation for new U.S. sanctions, while the Trump administration increases pressure on China after North Korea's new missile test. We have it all covered. I want to begin with CNN's Sarah Murray live at the White House. A busy day, Sarah.
That's right. And John Kelly's first day here at the White House, as you guys noted, he will be sworn in this morning, followed by that cabinet meeting. But everyone has the same question on the top of their minds. Can Kelly really bring order to this very wild West Wing?
Reince is a good man. John Kelly will do a fantastic job.
President Trump turning to retired four-star General John Kelly for help rebooting a stalled White House agenda and reining in a chaotic West Wing. That's after Reince Priebus became the latest in a string of high-profile Trump officials to be pushed out in the first 6 months.
And I think the president wants to go a different direction, wants a little bit more discipline, a little more structure in there.
It remains unclear how Kelly's appointment will impact the chain of command at the White House, and if the former Homeland Security chief will exert any influence over the president's own behavior, including his use of Twitter.
You have to let Trump be Trump. Anybody who thinks they're going to change Donald Trump doesn't know Donald Trump.
The president remains at odds with many in his party over his repeated public attacks on Attorney General Jeff Sessions.
Well, it's kind of hurtful, but the president of the United States is a strong leader.
The two men are expected to come face-to-face today at the president's cabinet meeting. Trump also turning to health care this weekend, blasting the Senate's failed efforts to dismantle Obamacare, tweeting, "Unless the Republican senators are total quitters, repeal and replace is not dead." Despite the fact that it would have had no impact on Friday's defeat, the president also urging GOP leadership to change the Senate's rules so legislation can pass with a simple majority, saying that Republicans look like fools who are just wasting their time.
You know, I said from the beginning, let Obamacare implode and then do it.
Trump also threatening to end subsidy payments to insurance companies and even eliminate some health benefits for members of Congress if the bill is not passed.
What he's saying is, look, if Obamacare is hurting people, and it is, then why shouldn't it hurt insurance companies and, more importantly, perhaps for this discussion, members of Congress?
Senator Susan Collins, one of 3 Republican senators who voted against repeal, says Trump's threats wouldn't change her vote.
We need to go back to committee, to the Health Committee and the Finance Committee, identify the problems, carefully evaluate possible solutions through hearings, and then produce a series of bills to correct these problems.
Now, on top of the domestic agenda and organizational challenges, John Kelly, of course, will be here at the White House as they're confronting a number of foreign policy threats, including escalating aggression from North Korea and the U.S. relationship with Russia. We are waiting to hear when exactly Trump will be signing that Russia sanctions bill. Back to you guys.
Okay, Sarah, thank you very much for setting all of that up for us. Let's bring in our political panel. We have here CNN political commentator Errol Louis, CNN political analysts John Avlon and David Drucker, all in the house. This is a fun morning for us. Let's start with you, Errol. General John Kelly, what is likely to change with him as Chief of Staff?
Probably not as much as people would think. The reality is, if you've already had General Kelly, General McMaster, General Mattis, at very high levels of the administration, they have not exercised any restraint that anybody can see. So I think people should disabuse themselves of the notion that simply having a general walk into the White House, into the highest levels of the administration, is going to set everything right. I suspect that one thing that will change is that he is going to get an education. General Kelly, is going to get an education. He has spent most of the last couple of decades of his life having people stand up and literally salute him when he walks in the room. That ain't going to happen anymore. He's going to be, I think, probably a little surprised at how people are inclined to, I think in White House parlance, leak. From our point of view, simply sort of conduct a public dialogue and sort of have discussions broadly across the government and with the press. I don't think we're going to see as much change as people would like to see.
Well, I'm going to push back on my friend here a little bit. Maybe the triumph of hope over experience. But look, the military members of this administration have been the most effective, in part because they've been working in concert trying to contain the president. Now, Chief of Staff's not going to supplant the president's own chaos, his own lack of discipline. But Reince Priebus clearly didn't have the confidence of the president, and this Chief of Staff's a difficult job. I mean, you're not going to have literally Anthony Scaramucci reporting to this Chief of Staff. That seems to be a glaring problem. The president's daughter and son-in-law don't really report to the Chief of Staff. But if anyone can make this work coherently, it's going to be a general working within the White House in concert with the other military members. Now, that raises other concerns, but Kelly's got a good reputation, and maybe he can get this administration working.
You know, John Avlon said control this president in case people were asleep for the last 6 days.
Or just forgotten.
Or just forgotten. Let us remind
6
folks.
days. What about 48 hours?
Let's remind people what happened last week, right? Let's walk people down memory lane. On Monday, the president attacked the attorney general on Twitter, and then he went to the Boy Scouts and gave a speech that the Boy Scouts later had to apologize before. On Tuesday, he said he could be more presidential than any president but Lincoln. And he also attacked Jeff Sessions to the Wall Street Journal, and he talked about him in the Rose Garden. On Wednesday, he tweeted new military policy, apparently without talking to the actual military of the United States of America. And that's when the new communications director, Anthony Scaramucci, started saying things about Reince Priebus behind his back. On Thursday, this whole West Wing war went incredibly public with our friend Ryan Lizza printing words we cannot speak out loud and writing about things that humans cannot do. And then on Friday, healthcare went down in the Senate, and then his chief of staff got fired. Now, any one of these days, they're bad Monopoly pieces, or maybe Clue, right? Or maybe Clue, and someone's about to get whacked because Reince Priebus did. But David Drucker, any one of those days, enough. You know, a month's worth, a year's worth of problems in an administration, and they happened every day last week. There's a short-term problem for John Kelly as chief of staff right now. He's got to stop any of those things from happening.
It's like a yellow brick road to hell you just described there for the administration. Look, I think that both Errol and John make some good points about Kelly. There are two kinds of people that President Trump respects. People that have made a lot of money, I mean a lot of money, and generals. And so Kelly comes in with an opportunity and a possibility of commanding the president's respect where Reince Priebus never could, because the president thinks political people are dopes. He just doesn't think they know anything and are good for anything. The problem is that it isn't Priebus's fault that he couldn't contain a president who won't be contained. Twitter, policy that veers left, right, and center at any given time for any given reason. Look at the 6 sides of the Obamacare issue that the president has been on, on any given day. And so I think the question here is not so much, can Kelly bring order to the White House staff? I think he can. And I know from talking to Republicans that the president really likes John Kelly, that he has been consulting with him over the phone about things outside of his portfolio at DHS. And so they've developed a relationship. But the real question here is, will Donald Trump, will the president empower Kelly to bring order, and will he participate in that so that when Kushner or his daughter or Scaramucci walks into the Oval with a question and he says, hey, did you talk to my chief of staff about it? And they'll say, no, I'm coming directly to you. Will he say, turn around, good to see you, go talk to the chief, let him bring it to me? That's what's required here.
Yeah, let's talk about Jeff Sessions' future. It'll be very interesting to see what happens this morning at their first cabinet meeting where they come face to face. And do you think, Errol, that this is all just one big sort of chess game where now that John Kelly has been moved out of DHS, that's a natural fit for Sessions and that's where he'll be headed?
Well, there's some interesting commentary around that. The notion being that Sessions gets moved to DHS as a way, a less confrontational way of getting him out of the way, all as a prelude to trying to sort of stop the investigation, fire Mueller or some other kind of a chaotic possibility. I wouldn't put anything past this president when it comes to the Justice Department, when it comes to the probe. There's almost nothing, it seems, that sort of sways Donald Trump. Although he goes in a lot of different directions on a lot of different issues, he's been straight as an arrow on this. He doesn't want the investigation. He doesn't want a Justice Department that's going to look into it.
Drucker, you think actually Republicans are nervous about this? They don't want this to happen, and they think this is a possibility.
Yeah, they do. Look, I talked to them last week about the possibility of Sessions being fired or pushed out, and they were super concerned. And it wasn't, hey, just keep him around, stick him in a different office. They were worried that pushing Sessions out of the AG post, where they think he's effective and where he belongs, it could be a prelude to going after Mueller. That would force them to get off the sidelines and confront the president. This is what they told me. And then the signals they're sending is leave Sessions alone. And that's one of the big reasons they're worried about this.
Yeah, and this is also like idiot cunning, like, we'll move him over and not fire him, and maybe no one will notice. Like, everyone will notice because it's really transparent what you're trying to do. You're trying to move him so you can fire Mueller, and the Senate's already said they've got a problem, in addition to the fact that it's a functional demotion in terms of the portfolio power. The Senate's been really clear about this from Chuck Grassley on down, that if you remove the AG, we're not going to be falling all over ourselves for a confirmation, and those confirmations hearings, if they were to occur, would be incredibly tough. The president needs to recognize that they're setting up a constitutional crisis if they move down this path, one way or the other.
Okay, last, healthcare. Where are we today, Errol, with healthcare?
if you talk to members of Congress, they've moved on. They're thinking about tax reform. They're in some cases, I think, trying to sort of hunker down because some of their adversaries who managed to defeat their repeal effort have actually mounted a public campaign. Even after winning, they're going to hit the road. They're going to target some of the marginal Congress members that they think they can sort of make this stick on, and they're going to go and say, why did you vote for repeal? So there's a handful of members that are going to have a problem. The rest, I think, are more than willing to move on. They're going to have, of course, a math problem because it was supposed to be the savings from repeal that was going to sort of fund the tax cuts that are central to their tax plan. So they're kind of stuck right now, but they are going to move ahead with tax reform.
And there's a very real decision the president, Kellyanne Conway, claims the president will make this week, which is whether to continue the subsidies to insurers. $7 billion that actually goes towards helping low-income people pay for their insurance, John Avlon. Do you think that the president really will take this money away?
I mean, look, you know, the president's rhetoric has been let it fail on its own. If he were to take this money proactively away, this is an arsonist complaining about a fire problem. And it does run against the basis obligation of a president to actually help people. Let's not forget, I mean, this is the existing situation. A president shouldn't proactively make it worse to score political points. What's heartening is that there's a pushback in the House. There are 40 centrist members, both parties, trying to find a reform package to at least keep the system solvent. That's the kind of thing that needs to be supported. But the fact that the president's considering sort of pouring, you know, the sort of fuel on the fire is a sign of someone who's not thinking about the national interest as much as self-interest.
All right, guys, stick around because we have two international crises confronting the president, the nuclear threat from North Korea and Russia retaliating against new U.S. sanctions. How will the president respond to these issues? We'll discuss that next.
And Beijing as we head toward crises and confrontations around the world. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Early Start. I'm Dave Briggs.
Good morning. I'm Allison Cossack sitting in for Christine Romans. It's Monday, July 31st. It's 5 a.m. in the East, and President Trump's new chief of staff front and center at the White House. John Kelly assumes the position after what many view as the worst week of the Trump presidency. Kelly is going to be sworn in at 9:30 this morning. The retired Marine Corps general will be enlisted with trying to restore order to a White House that appears to lack direction and discipline.
That, of course, no easy task for sure. Both sides of the aisle are what you might call cautiously optimistic.
I look forward to working with General Kelly.
I do think that General Kelly will do a good job as the White House Chief of Staff. I think he will bring some order and discipline to the West Wing.
If anybody can bring order and discipline to this White House, it is General Kelly.
I think that in terms of a great leadership component that the White House needs, General Kelly represents it. A big early challenge for Kelly concerns chain of command issues. Who reports to whom is still unclear. Typically, senior advisors report to the chief of staff. As we know, though, this is not your typical White House.
A senior administration official does tell CNN Kelly has been given full authority. The president tapped General Kelly, who was serving as Homeland Security Secretary, to replace Reince Priebus, who resigned last week.
All right, let's bring in Greg Valliere, political economist and chief strategist for Horizon Investments. He's in our Washington bureau. Good to see you, sir.
Nice to see you
Good
guys.
morning.
Good morning.
All right, let's start with General John Kelly, a four-star general, former Marine general. How can he instill some discipline, some order in what's only described as a chaotic White House?
Well, it's got to be chain of command, Dave, and I think that's an area where it's still ambiguous, so we'll see there. To a certain extent, I feel sorry for him. He's got a high bar to clear, since you had all those sound bites from everyone saying he's going to do a pretty good job, or he should be able to do a good job. Number two, he's got a tough boss to work for. But number three, I think the big issue as we get into the fall, which is a budget crisis that's looming, may not be his strong suit.
And you talk about, Greg, what's looming. We have the debt crisis, raising the debt ceiling coming up in the fall. And then what Wall Street is looking for. Wall Street is looking for tax reform. And now there's talk about, you know, forget about skinny health care reform. There's talk of skinny tax reform now.
Yeah, there's talk of that, Allison, and I'd say before we even get to that, we may revisit once again health care. You'd think they'd had a belly full of health care, but we may go back and look at something to bail out insurers, not out of the question that we could get a bill there. And then, as you say, there's a big budget fight coming. You've got to raise the debt ceiling. You have to come up with a budget resolution for the new fiscal year. All this stuff comes first before you even get to taxes. So for the general, who's very good, I would be the first to agree, but the issues are going to be tough ones for him to tackle.
Yeah, and Greg, from what we understand, the markets were hoping that he would pivot to tax reform. It doesn't appear that the president wants that to happen. The tweets over the weekend saying, let's get back to another vote on health care, threatening to pull the rug out from under the exchanges and from the congressional health care plan itself. What is the appetite in the Senate, do you believe, from Mitch McConnell towards sticking with health care and finding another path forward?
Well, I think a lot of Republicans are saying to the Democrats, what ideas do you guys have? And there may be some bipartisan talks as we get into the fall, but time is really short with the budget issue, with tax issues. So I'm not sure how much time they'll have to devote to that. And here we have this morning, Monday morning, a news story. And that, of course, is growing geopolitical concerns, especially when it comes to U.S.-China relations.
And you look at these geopolitical stories that are hitting the news. Well, we don't see the market being rattled by that. You look at how the S&P is doing and the Dow, they're up more than 10% so far this year. What can really rattle the market? And this is of particular interest to anyone who is invested in the stock market.
Well, first and foremost, Allison, the fundamentals are great. Moderate growth, great labor market, low inflation, steady interest rates, good corporate earnings. So that's fine. There's only two things that I would see that could rattle the markets. Number one would be any sign that tax reform is dead. But I don't think it's dead. I think it's going to plod along. It's going to take a while. The other one, though, the real wild card now is geopolitical. And I think since Donald Trump loves scapegoats, since he can't get North Korea to do what he wants, he's going to make China a scapegoat. So I worry later this week we may hear the announcement of new U.S. trade sanctions against China. For the markets, a U.S.-China trade war is not a good story.
Yeah, if there's any country on earth that's immune to Twitter diplomacy, it's probably China, right, Greg?
Well
what
said.
What can the president do to try and move China on doing something to stop the North Korean nuclear program?
Well, he can threaten, but I think we'll see on health care, you can't threaten Congress. On China, you can't threaten them to do anything. I do think that we're going to have more military exercises, maybe more of these HARM missiles that could shoot down Korean missiles shipped into South Korea. There are a few things we can do, but the idea that China can wave a magic wand and immediately get North Korea to behave, I think that's far-fetched.
Back to healthcare, you talk about what the market doesn't want to see. Does the market want to see President Trump try to implode Obamacare? We heard from Health and Human Services Secretary Tom Price on Sunday about this. Let's first listen.
Sure.
What about the individual mandate? Is the president considering directing his agencies not to enforce it? Have you ruled that out?
Well, the individual mandate is one of those things that actually is driving up the cost for the American people in terms of coverage. So what we're trying to do is make it so that Obamacare is no longer harming the patients of this land, no longer driving up costs, no longer making it so they've got coverage but no care. And the individual mandate is one of those things. All things are on the table to try to help patients.
Greg, is the individual mandate driving up costs, or if you take away the individual mandate, this is like a house of cards, obviously the whole thing will just collapse?
Well, a lot of arguments pro and con on whether it's driving up costs. If you take it away, less people will be insured. And one thing that President Trump said a couple of weeks ago that just simply doesn't ring right is that I don't own health insurance. Oh, yes, he does. He owns health care. And whatever party is in power usually views it as an albatross. They don't like to own it because it's such a difficult issue. But I think if Obamacare really does implode this fall, the Republicans get the blame.
All right, Greg Valliere from Horizon Investments will ask you about the future of Jeff Sessions in about 20 minutes. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg. All right, insurers have until August 16th to set Obamacare rates for 2018, but the president's threat to cut off subsidies could mean higher premiums. The president tweeting that if a new health care bill isn't approved soon, bailouts for insurance companies could end. Insurers hate uncertainty, and they're swimming in it right now. They rely on $8 billion in cost-sharing subsidies to help pay for low-income Americans. So some carriers, they've already requested large rate hikes next year to offset costs.
Nearly half of the companies plan to increase premiums by 20% or more. Meantime, other insurers, they're exiting the exchanges completely. Big names like Aetna, Humana, and Anthem. In fact, 25,000 people in 3 states, they're at risk of having no Obamacare options at all next year, while an additional 2.7 million Americans could have just one option for an insurance carrier. Insurers say they want to work with the administration to fix Obamacare, but Washington's actions so far have fueled instability. Besides threatening cost-sharing subsidies, the White House hasn't committed to enforcing the individual mandate, and that one is really getting younger, healthier people to enroll, offsetting the cost for more expensive customers.
Not clear what the path forward is. Susan Collins said let's go back to committee and try to fix health care exchanges, but it's not clear anyone has the appetite for that either. Okay, new trouble from a trio of global adversaries. Russia retaliates for sanctions, another missile launch from North Korea, and Venezuela just in chaos after an election being called on a...
Welcome back. In apparent retaliation for the sanctions bill just passed by Congress, Russian President Vladimir Putin now confirming the staff at U.S. diplomatic missions in Russia will be cut dramatically by more than 700, and that includes diplomats and technical workers. The State Department says the move is regrettable and uncalled for. Officials are assessing the impact and a possible response. Let's bring in CNN's Claire Sebastian. She's live for us in Moscow. So, Claire, how does this impact the U.S. mission in Russia?
Well, it looks like it's going to cut the number of personnel, Alison, by more than half. 755 positions will get cut, according to the Russian President Vladimir Putin speaking on Russian television last night. Now, the Russian rationale behind this is that brings the total number of U.S. diplomatic personnel in Russia down to 455, which Russia says is the exact same number of Russian diplomatic personnel that it has in the U.S. But it should be noted that on the face of this, Russia says this is settling the score for actions that the Obama administration took back in December, seizing 2 Russian diplomatic compounds and expelling 35 diplomats, 755, a significantly bigger number than that. But as you said, it does affect technical staff as well as diplomats, and we expect as well local Russian staff here in Russia as well. But the president saying that the clinching factor for this was, of course, that passage through Congress of that bill authorizing new sanctions. He said this is why he took that action. Take a listen.
We waited a long time for things to perhaps change for the better. We had such hope that the situation would change, but judging by the situation, that will not be soon.
Now, Vice President Mike Pence is in Estonia right now, reassuring that country and NATO of the U.S.'s commitment. That will certainly inflame tensions further. He says he expects Russia's behavior to change. Russia, for its part, says it does not bow to pressure. So this is certainly a tense moment, Alison.
It certainly is. CNN's Claire Sebastian live for us from Moscow. Thanks.
The U.S. and Japan agreeing to take further action against North Korea. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe and President Trump speaking by phone Sunday, just days after North Korea's latest missile launch. The two leaders discussing increased economic and diplomatic pressure on the Kim Jong-un regime.
CNN breaking news.
And good evening. I'm Jim Sciutto in tonight for Aaron Burnett. You were just listening to Reince Priebus. He's the subject of our breaking news tonight. The White House Chief of Staff replaced. Priebus is out. The retired General John Kelly is taking over. I want to get right to our panel. Jeff Zeleny, senior White House correspondent. Mark Preston, he's executive editor for CNN Politics. Margaret Tlaib, senior White House correspondent for Bloomberg. Chris Cillizza, reporter and editor-at-large for CNN Politics. And General James Spider Marks, who knows General Kelly very well. They served together in Iraq. Mark Preston, I want to begin with you. We heard Reince Priebus there playing, you might say, the good Boy Scout, saying in a good conversation with the president tonight, saying that Kelly as chief of staff, in his words, a brilliant choice, that the president was great, Reince Priebus said. Playing the good Boy Scout there, do you think that reflects the reality of these last few days, these last few hours for the now former chief of staff?
Well, Jim, I would even go back to these last few weeks, if not last few months. No, I think inside, Reince Priebus is probably boiling with anger, thinking that he put it all on the line for the president and, in fact, was not rewarded with the loyalty back. But the fact of the matter was there did need to be a reboot in this White House, perhaps right from the top. Quite frankly, there needs to be a reboot, meaning President Trump really needs to handle things differently. But Reince Priebus, Jim, there's no way that he could go out in a gun battle with the President of the United States. To do so would just close so many opportunities for him to hold jobs, specifically in politics or in policy here in Washington, D.C., if he were to make an enemy with Donald Trump.
Jeff Zeleny, you cover the White House. You've covered Trump throughout the campaign and now through 6 months of his administration. Does Reince Priebus's description of things, everything is in effect hunky-dory, this was friendly, it was expected, he was talking about it for a couple of weeks, does that reflect the reality inside the White House, inside the administration as you've seen it?
It does not, Jim, and it's not surprising. Look, I mean, this is something that, frankly, Reince Priebus hoped it wouldn't come to. He wanted to serve a year as chief of staff. And, you know, this has been a very different administration, a fast-paced administration. If most administrations are driving 60 or 65 or so, this administration is probably driving about twice as that in terms of the, different changes, the tweets, the, just how quick things have moved here, how many changes have been made, et cetera. So Reince Priebus simply, could not hold on that long. And the president didn't want him to hold on that long. But I think, look, Reince Priebus is trying to put a very positive face on this, Jim. But I think one thing that was very telling when Wolf asked him what his favorite moment was, he said it was the first day when he walked into the Oval Office. I think from that moment, from January 20th, it got more difficult by the day. And the president, we are told by our reporting over these last several weeks and months, began to view Reince Priebus as chief of staff as an irritant. He did not want him around. He began to view him as essentially a junior staffer who he didn't really want to listen to. That is very difficult for anyone to be in. And I think also Reince Priebus had a very difficult job, to be quite honest. If you talk to other chiefs of staff for previous presidents, as we often do, who watched this throughout and had some sympathy for Reince Priebus because there's never been a president like this who's tweeted his thoughts at all hours of the day, et cetera. Someone very close to Reince Priebus told me something that I haven't forgotten. It was a couple months or so ago, and they said the one thing that makes his job so difficult is that most chiefs of staff have the president's ear at the end of the day, and they know that word is set. This president talks to so many people. There are so many avenues into him. So many people have his ear. It made it very difficult for him to keep him focused on track and to do his job. But look, it is time for a reset, as Mark said, and Reince didn't want to leave. The president didn't want him to stay.
Right. If you're the chief of staff and you're viewed as a junior staffer, that's certainly a problem for your position. Let's not forget, if we can, Chris Cillizza, the events, and it's easy because these events move so quickly, of just the last 24 hours. You have the failure of a 7-year fight to repeal and replace Obamacare, which was a priority for the president, for the administration as well. And you have the new communications director, it's less than 24 hours ago, tweeting, in effect, an accusation, really, at Reince Priebus that he was one of the leakers here. What do you think? Was it the failure of Obamacare or the repeal of Obamacare that was the final straw? Was it this leaking allegation? What was the final straw for Reince Priebus as chief of staff?
Just quickly, too, Jim, go back a few days, calling his own attorney general beleaguered and very weak. Right. The speech to the Boy Scouts, the tweets about transgender people not being able to serve in the military. I mean, this week it's felt like 6 weeks. My guess is they will cite as the catalyst the failure of the health care vote, because Priebus was brought in many ways. He's a guy who knows Washington, right? He's supposed to be able to grease the skids, make this stuff work, and it didn't. But in truth, I think what Jeff said is the key, the thing to latch onto, which is Trump wants to be surrounded by people that he views as his peers and his equals. And that's not a lot of people. It's usually very wealthy people or his family. That's always been how he's kept
generals,
a lot of his,
really, right?
And generals.
You have
that's exactly
the Mattis's, the McMasters, and now Kelly.
And so what you now have is an inner circle that once included some D.C. establishment types. Remember, Reince's hiring was meant to be seen as an olive branch to the Washington establishment. I think what you see after 6 months is Donald Trump saying, you know what, all these guys are small potatoes. All these guys, they don't know anything. They can't really, they say they're going to help us. They haven't done anything. Now you've got Scaramucci, who, in a traditional Washington gambit, if you had what Scaramucci said to Ryan Lizza and you have Reince, Reince wins every time, but not in Trump's world, right? In Trump's world, Scaramucci is that guy because he views him as a peer. He only views people as peers, tends to be, to your point, military, rich people, and people with whom he is related. So Ivanka, Jared, those types.
You mentioned Scaramucci, and Wolf Blitzer asked Reince Priebus about Scaramucci's really profane comments about Reince Priebus in that interview with the New Yorker yesterday. Here's how Reince Priebus answered that question.
Are you the leaker in the White House?
That's ridiculous. Wolf, come on. Give me a break. I'm not going to get into his
accusations. Why not respond to him?
Because I'm not going to, because it doesn't honor the president. I'm going to honor the president every day. I'm going to honor his agenda.
He went on to say that I'm not going to get into the mud, a reference again to those profane, really dirty comments. That
appreciate it very much. Let's get some reaction. Mike Rogers, first to you. What do you think?
No, very